Hello everyone, it's me Arden Lee. I am back with another video, and in this video I want to talk about the different reasons that both men and women can overgive in relationships and end up abandoned and disappointed that their generosity was not reciprocated, or in some cases even appreciated. And before I get into that topic, if you're not already familiar with my work, I would love to invite you to check out the description box, whether it's below you if you are on YouTube, or it might be above you if you're watching this on Facebook. And in either case, I have a link to a free PDF guide about the repatterning modality that I use in my 8-week course, The Repatterning Project. If you want to know how that works, I definitely recommend downloading that, giving it a good little go through, and seeing if it's possibly right for you. There's also a link to the Repatterning Parlor, which is the free group that I've created on Facebook, full of like-minded individuals and moderated by myself, where you can receive support for your journey. Here at the Repatterning headquarters, we believe in optimizing our lives for success and happiness through thought hacking and belief creation into the empowered state of being able to create our realities around us. That by understanding how to change our internal state, we can then change our external results as well. So definitely give that a look if that sounds like something that you're interested in. So the reason I want to talk about this topic today, I met a man a couple days ago, and he gave me permission to talk about his story in this video. I was actually telling him, I met him like out at a bar, and I was just telling him about a little bit about what I do, and he was confiding in me that he was going through a divorce because he found out his wife that he had been with for over a decade, to whom he had given so many things, for whom he had provided, for not only her and the family, but for their child as well. He found out that she had been having an affair for 6 months with someone who they kind of both knew through work environments or what have you, and he was shocked and disappointed. And so sometimes I feel like for lack of a better word, sometimes I feel like God kind of sends me people who maybe need some of these downloads or upgrades, who are in that really devastated state of having their reality just collapse before them, and not knowing where to go from there. And so I was so happy to explain to this man about my work and about what I do, and to share with him some of my stories about how I've been the overgiver in relationships, and how I came to understand that that really had nothing to do with me, that situation had nothing to do with me, that it wasn't like I wasn't enough. Sometimes I think it's really interesting that we're so forgiving of other people and their stories. We're so quick to defend their inherent goodness, or their not being at fault, and we're so hesitant to give those own give that forgiveness and that compassion to ourselves. So I told this man, I wasn't sitting there trying to compete with him for being in pain, but I said I understand. I said I won't pretend that I understand your full situation. I've never been married, even though I've cohabitated with a partner where it almost felt like we were married. But I was like, I've never been married, I've never been through a divorce, I've never had a child. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend that, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I know what you're going through is like. But what I will say is that I was in several long-term relationships where I was the overgiver. There was a man who really relied on me quite a great deal. To the point where I ended up paying his legal fees for him to stay out of jail. And then when he lost everything, I moved him in with me, and I was financially supporting him, paying our rent together. And after about a year of that, he became abusive. Well, I think he was abusive before that, but he became more obvious. He started breaking my furniture and briefly tried to kill me. And this man goes, "Oh my God, wow, I'm so sorry you've been through that. I hope you know that's not your fault. That has nothing to do with you." And as he's saying it, I see the light go on in his head. He's like, "That's so funny. I was like, it's not your fault, it's not your fault. And I can see that in you perfectly clearly. Just here, he's like, I've just met you at a bar. I just met you here, and I can hear your story, and I can know immediately that that's not your fault. But wow, why don't I do that for myself, right? So that's an important lesson to learn in itself, that to start extending that same self-compassion to yourself, the same compassion to yourself that you give to other people, right? That could be its own video too, and if you guys have been following that, you probably already know that a little bit, but I thought that was a really clear example. And what I saw in the common denominator in his story and my story was that we both felt that by giving of ourselves in the ways that we knew how to our partners, that should, in theory, have earned their loyalty and even their reciprocity. And what I noticed about each of our stories was that they have this really different sort of socially conditioned angle to them, right? When I look at my story, the ways that I was overgiving for so many of the men that I was in toxic relationships with throughout my life, it was in this very sort of feminine but patriarchal kind of way, right? So I was, cooking. I was, I identified as submissive. I was a part of the BDSM community, and I identified as sexually submissive to the point where their feelings, and their desires really overrode mine. And I did that because my feelings and my desires were, I was made to believe when I was growing up, that those things were dangerous by, one parent in my life, and a whole a whole legal system that backed that person up, essentially. So so there were certainly many reasons, and I can look at all all the reasons that all of that was conditioned into me, and I look at the way that society conditioned me as a woman to be pleasing, to worry about a man's feelings more than I worried about my own, to believe that his sexual desires and needs were more important than mine, to believe that submitting to his authority was just the best way to be in a relationship, and I'm not surprised given my own personal trauma and given the way that society conditioned me within my gender role, that is eventually how I sort of ended up. And for a long time, I've spoken out, especially in the wake of the Me Too movement, about how women are conditioned in this particular way. But something that, I haven't spoken about quite as often, just because perhaps it's not as personal of a struggle to me, is the ways that men are conditioned in ways that may be oppositional, but certainly in combination with their own traumas or their own patterns can absolutely end up being like basically the same thing, only the masculine version of it. So where I was conditioned to be a people pleaser by performing emotional labor, doing more of the day-to-day work, whether it was around the house or the office, because this man I was in a relationship with and I were working together as well. All of that, no matter what, all of those ways, particularly the sexual submission, particularly being pleasing emotionally, were ways that I was conditioned, into being pleasing by the fact that I was a woman. But this man I was at the bar with the other night, who was sharing his story with me, was telling me how, he's like, I gave this woman everything that she wanted. I provided for us. I have a great job. I took us on vacation. I raised our child. I helped to raise our child, and I made sure that our child wasn't lacking for anything. The wedding ring that I bought, the engagement ring that I bought this woman was like $15,000. Who spends that kind of money on an engagement ring? Anything she want, I gave to her. And he said to me, and as I'm hearing all of this from him, I'm realizing how similar our stories are, only he was conditioned by the patriarchal society that we live in as a man to find his worth in being a provider. So he found his worth by saying, hey, I take my family on these vacations. I buy them, I bought them this beautiful house, and I make sure that all of their material needs are taken care of. I'm the man of the house. I make sure that, he even, I think, said that he had helped out, his wife with finding, her employment and things like that. he really took on that role of a masculine leader and made sure that everyone in his family, his wife and his child, were provided for. And for me, I did similar things. I was a people pleaser in similar ways, but I was more pleasing by being emotionally adaptive and by being sexually pleasing. So I thought it was really interesting how we both had the same core issue of, if I treat you well, then in my mind, I believe that you should treat me well back. But we did it in these different socially conditioned ways, each based on our gender and what we were raised to believe that a pleasing man versus a pleasing woman would act like and be able to provide. So as much as I speak so often about the ways that women are conditioned by society, I try to speak I try to speak up as well about the conditioning that men receive that is also not serving them. And it's easy to look at the patriarchy and say, oh hey, well, it encourages men to be successful and be out there and be go-getters, and that they're the ones who deserve all the jobs, especially if they're white men, and et cetera, et cetera. And that's easy to say, but there's so many ways that same conditioning can also be harmful, and it can also put men in the disenfranchised position in their relationships, where they're trying to be the good guy and be the provider. And and he mentioned being faithful to her throughout the decade, over a decade that they were together. And he's, I don't understand, why would she do this? Like, why would a person do this when I gave her everything that she wanted? And I said, because she's selfish, because that's her, that's inherent to her. And I had a friend, who I was describing, another relationship I'd been in, where I'd been incredibly submissive and done a whole ton of emotional and sexual labor in order to keep a person from abandoning me. And I had a friend I was talking about this with. He's an astrologer friend of mine who's worked at least one of my events. Cameron White. He does white light astrology. He's a super, super smart guy. And he's like, oh my God, you guys, he's really young. He's like super early 20s, but he's so wise. And so there I am, like me at my age, like talking about like this toxic relationship that I've been through. And like, I'm like, I did this and I did that, and I just couldn't understand. And my friend Cameron turns to me, in the midst of this conversation, and he says, Arden, if you give a man the world, he'll take it. And I was just like, my mind was just blown. And I was like, wow, you're right. I totally handed all that to this person in the hopes that my being this way for them would mean that I was valuable to them, and unfortunately it didn't work that way. And so just the same as I did that in some of my relationships, this man I met the other night, certainly did that for his former partner as well, in ways that society conditioned him to do because of his identity as a man. So, I know I talk a lot about women's rights. I talk a lot about feminism, not because I want to go out of my way necessarily, but because it is a really important movement right now that we need more and more understanding around. But so much of the gender struggle is also about liberating men from their constraints that they're in as well. That they're in these narrow boxes that the patriarchy tries to define for them, and says, you're going to be a good husband if you're a provider, and if you work really hard, and if you do all these things. And so in so many ways, men are capable of taking that same conditioning that also, in many other ways may also like prop them up and give them more confidence. They're also capable of taking that same conditioning and believing that is the thing that brings them value, and believing that that's what makes them worthy of love. And if you believe that the way that you please people is what makes you worthy of love, then you're not going to be able to filter out the people who are just using you for what you can provide for them, and you're not going to be able to call in that person who loves you unconditionally, who loves you whether you're all dolled up or whether you're in sweatpants, who loves you when you're super successful and is so grateful to be by your side and receive from you, and who is also going to stick with you when you're not doing as well, who's going to say, we're in this together and we're a team, right? That's what I love about the Addams Family Values movies, right? Is that Morticia and Gomez had this this relationship where no matter what happens to them, they're a team all the way through it. And I remember, I think it's Adam's Family Values is the one I'm thinking of. I remember Morticia like has to actually like go out and get a job because they fall on hard times. And you know, even though she might have her feelings about it, she's like, this is what I do. This is like, I'm loyal to my family. I'm gonna do what my family needs, and I'm not gonna bitch about it and complain about it, you know, just because we fell on hard times, and I still very much love my husband and I love my family, right? So if I was married to Gomez Adams, I'm sure I'd feel the same way. So anyway, so I think that's an important thing to point out, that even though the social conditioning we receive is different, they can still affect the ways that we show up in relationships, and that both men and women are susceptible to that same algorithm of, if I just treat you well, you will value me, and therefore you will keep me and you will love me back, and maybe you'll even throw like a crumb my way once in a while. But even that is enough for me because I just want to keep you and I want to make you happy. That's a belief system that gets bandied about a lot nowadays, and can disguise itself as love, but it's really a fear. You know, it's really fear that we're not enough if we're not constantly doing for another person. And believe me, I lived in that fear for a long time, and it's miserable. Women are susceptible to it, and men are susceptible to it as well, if sometimes often in different ways because of our gender identities. But I think it's important that we acknowledge that similarity. So to that guy out there that I met, I really hope that you're doing well right now. I gave you my channel at the end of our talk, and I hope if you're watching this that you feel better. I hope this is helping, and thank you for letting me use some of your story, even with all identifying details out of the equation. Thank you for letting me use some of your story to help other people as well, because I guarantee you there are people watching this video, and just by virtue of your sharing with me, you've made them feel a little less alone too. So thank you for that, and to the rest of you out there, thank you for listening, and I hope this was helpful. Have a great night.